Welcome everyone. We are here for the webinar jointly organized by CAHO and AHPI on the generation, supply, management, conservation, and economics of oxygen, all put in one together. COVID wave 2 came to be much more devastating in the month of April this year as compared to the same time, April, May last year when COVID-1 came. The main reason happened to be the fibrosis of liver, which resulted into large fertility, and we were unable to manage this kind of devastation. The only medicine for liver fibrosis happens to be oxygen. And this level of oxygen requirement, which I am told by my colleagues that in the previous wave, hardly 30% patient required oxygen beds, while in this phase, 90% patient coming to hospital required oxygen. So the oxygen requirement went 3 times in general ward or isolation ward and 5 times in the ICU ward. So we can understand when the demand becomes that large, it was absolutely not possible to foresee and manage and have the supply of oxygen of this kind. And that is where I think all of us are putting our mind together today to consider how do we prepare ourselves if at all anything of this magnitude comes again. So let me just say on my own behalf and my colleague, Dr. Vijay Agarwal, both of us will be moderating this session. We have absolutely eminent faculty today to discuss on the subject. Let me first welcome Dr. Bhagat Biswas, whom we have requested to be present today as guest of honor. And he will be summing it up at the end of the webinar after listening our views. Because let me tell you, he is the member of the Supreme Court appointed committee of experts on oxygen. So we are really privileged to have him among us today. Otherwise, I think he is so well known, I don't have to mention, but he is our good colleague. He is founder of the HPI. He is the ex-vice chancellor of the West Bengal University of Health Sciences. Currently the principal of Vivekananda Institute of Medical Sciences, Ramakrishna Mission. And also he is a member of the 15th Finance Committee set up by Government of India. So we welcome Dr. Bhagat Biswas for this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our other eminent faculty will be Dr. Bhagat, who is MD Anesthesiology from AIIMS, Medical Director of the 2 institutes in Delhi, former Secretary General of CAHO, and above all, I consider him one of the most enthusiastic person among us who actually keeps eye on the various development, concern, issues pertaining to the medical fraternity. Then we will have Dr. Jothi Clara, the Director of Nursing, IHH Healthcare, covering 6 cities, Hyderabad, Mumbai, Chennai, and Bangalore. So virtually she's covering entire India in terms of the hospital coverage. She will be talking to us. And she also happens to be the Vice President of the ANI, that is Associated Nursing Institute of India. Then we will have Dr. Sujit Chatterjee. He is the CEO. This is actually surprising for me. Many times I consider he is the founder CEO of the LH Hiranandani Hospital in Mumbai. And I remember this was the first hospital which got accreditation in Maharashtra, NABH accreditation. He has been the doctor with the armed forces from 1976 to 1999. And if in one line I want to say about him, I consider him as the administrator par excellence and who has not lost touch with the science of medicine. So this is the way I describe Sujit. Then we have our own Dr. Lallu Joseph, who is I don't know, I have to introduce Lallu here, perhaps, I don't know. But still I will say a few lines. She is the Associate General Superintendent and the Quality Manager of the prestigious CMC Vellore. She is Secretary General of the CAHO under whose leadership CAHO has risen to this level of height. She has trained over 3,000 quality professionals in the healthcare. I think that is a mind-boggling number. And at this stage, I don't know how many thousand she is going to train in time to come. So she will be talking on the subject. She'll be rather the opening speaker of the webinar. Then we have her colleague, Dr. Kishore Pichamuthu, who is professor and head of the medical ICU at the CMC. He is MD, Internal Medicine, MRCP, Glasgow, and expert in the intensive care. So we are going to have a lot of inputs from him as well. And last but not the least, Dr. Narin Sehgal, who is the secretary of NCR Delhi AHPI, medical director of the Sehgal Neo Hospitals. Otherwise, by training, he's a laparoscopic surgeon. And above all, very enthusiastic, medical professional in our group. So what we decided other day that we will have the order of the speaking will be Dr. Lallu Joseph will start and will be speaking on oxygen sources, supply, backup, bottling plants, and also touching upon the statutory requirement. She will be then followed up by Dr. Kishore Pichamuthu, and he will be talking on conservation strategies, and where Dr. Bhagat also will intervene as and when required. I mean, he will give his input on behalf of the smaller hospital. And he will be then followed up by Dr. Jothi Clara, who will be talking on auditing of the oxygen and the stewardship. Then we will have Dr. Sujit Chatterjee, who actually happened to have set up the first PSA plant in Maharashtra. So he'll be sharing his experience on PSA plant, LMO. And last, we will come to how do we manage oxygen in the smaller hospitals. And Dr. Narin Sehgal will be talking on this subject along with Dr. Bhagat. So I think this is our sequence. So without losing time, Dr. Vijay, you have to add anything?
So friends, this second wave has definitely exposed the inadequacy of our knowledge about something that we had been using right, left, and center earlier, and that is oxygen. But we never, I think if you take all the stakeholders within the hospital, none of them have a rounded knowledge about this entire thing, which has become like, it's the new gold, I will say, for the hospitals. And therefore, some people amongst our fraternity will not even know that how many types of oxygen cylinders are there, or if it is a liquid medical oxygen, then what are the things kind of associated with it, or whatever these new types of oxygen concentrators, what are being talked about. So we thought that it is extremely important, and then now we have the presence of Dr. Bhabatosh, whose presence we want to make use to really understand as to what is the thought process going on in the Supreme Court appointed committee. And idea is also that he can take from this webinar the viewpoint of the end users, and so that a well-informed, I would say, picture is also presented to the Supreme Court at some stage. So I thought that we can all play a great role in contributing to this, to let's say, enhance our own knowledge about source of oxygen. And I think one of the most important things Dr. Sujit Chatterjee will probably talk about is the economics of the various modalities. Let's hand it over to...
Okay, Dr. Lallu Joseph, please come in.
So I'll quickly take you through the oxygen sources, supply and backup. I have tried to keep my presentation within about 8 to 9 minutes, just to give you an overview about what are the various types of oxygen sources, supply, backup, estimating oxygen needs, and the differences between medical oxygen and industrial oxygen, because this is something that's much talked about today because of the MUCO. So what is this liquid medical oxygen? This is the liquid source. It's a cryogenic source, and the most popular choice for big hospitals and hospitals with good connectivity, because obviously to get this kind of a liquid supply, you need good connectivity. It's manufactured in huge industrial establishments and it has to be transported to your facility. There are very stringent licensing requirements under the PESO. You will have to have at least 9 meters radius around the cryogenic vessel and about 9 meters path and 13 meters radius so that the vehicle can move in. And it's the cleanest source. It's more than 99% pure. Oxygen here is stored in the liquid state. At about 15 degrees centigrade, 1 liter of liquid oxygen can produce about 842 liters of oxygen, gaseous oxygen. And in our conditions, about 27 degree, you get about 888 liters of oxygen. It's a very funny situation. Actually, we buy them in metric tons and we pay to the company in cubic meters of liquid. We consume in liters per minute of gas. So while you're charging your patient, you're actually charging them in liters of gas, whereas you're consuming, you're paying in cubic meters of liquid and you're buying them in metric tons. So this is a very interesting conversion ratio which you may want to know. 1 kilogram is about 0.867 liters of liquid. 1 kg is about 0.769 cubic meters of gas. And 1 cubic meter of gas is about 1000 liters of gaseous oxygen. So this is a rough estimate calculation that you may want to remember. The second one is the oxygen manifold. This is how our oxygen manifold typically looks like. Manifolds, they become the main supply for small hospitals. And this becomes the first level of backup for hospitals with the liquid medical oxygen. You need to have both the right bank and the left bank completely connected and pressurized. So what is connected to the manifold, we call it the D-type cylinders, which is about 6.7 cubic meter. The nomenclature, we must realize, is different in different countries. We follow the A, B, C, D system, whereas in the UK, it is JKL. So the D-type cylinders in India are basically the ones that we use in the manifold. The purity, it's over 99% because the liquid from the LMO is typically converted into gas under pressure and it is filled into this particular cylinder. Common types of cylinders used in India, the A type, which is about 5 liter capacity of water. That's 1 cubic meter of oxygen, which is what we use in our boils apparatus, the very small cylinders. The B type is what we use for transport. That's 10 liter capacity of water, 1.47 cubic meter. And the D type is what we use in the manifold, that is 44 liters capacity of water. And that's about 6.5 to 7 cubic meter of oxygen. So those are the bulk cylinders. So this is about manifolds. Now, typically many people ask this question. You know, I got this picture and when a patient was to be shifted from Coimbatore, saying it is showing 130 bars. And you know, the ambulance driver is saying it has 130 liters. How do I know whether my patient can be brought from Coimbatore to Chennai? Now, the gauge there doesn't read liters. It actually reads the pressure. The full gauge pressure for a D-type cylinder is about 138 bar. Now, in this particular example, it's about 130 bar, which means the cylinder is about 94% full. So when it is about 94% full of 6,500 liters, it means you have 6,110 liters. So if your patient is on 2 liters per minute, you can transfer him from probably Kanyakumari to Kashmir. 50 hours of oxygen supply will be there. If he's on 4 liters, then it is about 25, 10 liters, about 10 hours. If this particular cylinder is connected to a ventilator, it can work up to 6 bar because it is under pressure. If connected to flow meter with mask, empty, you can go up to the end, you know, up to 2 bar pressure, it can work. Now, this is the buzzword now, oxygen concentrators, generators. What does it do? Here, it's a constant source. It separates oxygen from the atmosphere. So it absorbs under high pressure. So you have compressor and you have this adsorbent also, which is the zeolite, which is aluminum silicate. And the purity that you get out of this oxygen concentrator or the generator is 90 to 95%. What are the impurities that are present? It's argon with small quantity of nitrogen. Purity is very good when you actually use it between 75 to 80% load. Now, if you have a 25 meter cube per hour plant, you can't load it completely, then your pressures will drop and the purity will also drop. So up to 75 to 80% load is what your concentrator can take. There are two technologies, the PSA and the VSA. PSA is pressure swing adsorption and VSA is the vacuum swing adsorption, which is a patented technology. Now there's another aspect to this where you can buy this plant and also have a bottling plant attached to it, which means there's another compressor which can actually compress and use like a bottling plant. But that capacity you can actually fill, for a 25 meter cube, you can get about 4 cylinders in an hour filled up. So it depends, and a lot of electricity usage. You'll have to factor in all those factors and maintenance and the electricity usage and all that. So this is about the oxygen concentrator. Now the supply part of it, you must remember, you cannot bank on only one supply. You have LMO, only LMO is not a good solution at all. You need to have 3 components of backup: the primary supply, the secondary supply, and the reserve supply. It depends on the size of your hospital, the complexity of your operation, and also the distance, which determines your supply chain. Now, this table is very important for any hospital administrator or owner. Please understand, if your primary supply is a gas cylinder manifold, you're a 100-bedded hospital and you're using manifold, then the primary supply should have auto changeover, which means if your left bank is running out, it has to automatically change over to your right bank. And you should also have a secondary supply. That could be a manual emergency cylinder manifold, another manifold, and an automatic system to provide at least 4 hours of supply, which should certainly be there. And there should be another reserve supply, which again can be an automatic manifold in another building, or at least for your manifold in, a separate manifold for your ICU, because that is your critical load. Only if you have this, then you have a backup to a backup to a backup. Your transport cylinders or your B-type cylinders can never be used as a backup. That's a very, very, wrong concept, saying that I have n number of transport cylinders, so I have backup. That's not the system at all. So you need a primary, secondary, and a reserve supply. Now, if you have a situation, you are a large hospital, you have a LMO. Like you may be a 300-bedded hospital, you may have a single vessel. You may be a 600-bedded hospital, you may have 2 vessels. You may be a 3,000-bedded hospital, you may have 2 separate vessels in 2 separate areas. So these are the 3 scenarios I've put together. If you're a single vessel, then what happens? You need to have a manifold as a backup. Then the reserve supply there can be a manifold again, or just your ICU connected to your manifold. Now, if you have 2 vessels, one vessel acts as a backup to the other vessel. So the second vessel is your secondary supply. And the reserve supply, again, here is an automatic manifold. Now, if there are 2 vessels in 2 separate areas, one vessel of a duplex system in one area and the second vessel in a separate area becomes your secondary supply. And then your manifold becomes your reserve supply. So this is extremely important. And if you have an oxygen concentrator, that becomes your primary supply. And then you can have a single vessel LMO as your backup, or an automatic manifold system as a backup. Reserve supply, again a manifold, or just your ICU or HTU covered. So this table is very important. You can't just say I have one system and do away with that one system. Estimating oxygen supply, there are 2 methods. One is the historical oxygen use and the facility level estimation. Historical, you look at the back data. How much have you been consuming over the years? Look at that. Facility level estimation, particularly when you are establishing a new setup, you have to look at the number of general beds, critical care beds, ORs, and other specific beds. But while planning, you have to plan for 100% capacity. The common mistake that we all do is we calculate and then we say, okay, it will be only 40% occupancy or 50% occupancy. And we tend to reduce and say, plan ourselves for only 40% occupancy. This is one way of calculating, which I picked up from the WHO table, where if you are planning for a 700-bed hospital, then you have to at least factor in 0.75 liters per minute for every bed. You may not use 0.75. You may use 4 liters per minute for one bed and other beds may not be using. But while factoring, it's 0.75 liters per minute per bed. And if you're planning 10 critical care beds, then 10 liters per minute is the estimate that you'll have to factor in mind. So if you're doing this, let's say in this hospital, 800 bedded, 1,525 liters per minute is your requirement, you could go for any of these options. You can plan to have 10,135 D-type cylinders per month, or 2,000 LPM PSA plants, or you can have 5 KL to LMO liquid medical oxygen cylinders. Now here, the decision is up to the administrators. Am I going to indent for 10,000 D-type cylinders? Is it feasible for me to go for a LMO plan, or is it feasible for me? And I'm sure Dr. Sujit will be talking about that. So average consumption is generally 35 to 40%, but you plan for 100% load. This is the current situation in Indian hospital. This was a study done after the first wave by a hospital in Kerala, and they have understood that only 12% of the hospitals have oxygen concentrator. It's out of about 30 hospitals that they surveyed. And liquid medical oxygen is the primary source for about 40%. Cylinder manifold is about 48%. That is why we ended up in such great problem banking on cylinder manifold. And reserve oxygen supply, if you look at it, 44% banked on cylinder, about 20% on liquid oxygen, and 36 no reserve supply at all. So this is the situation in our hospitals. So while planning for a good system, auto changeover is a must. You can't bank on your manual labor to be going and changing, looking at the levels at all times. Auto changeover from supply to backup. And the common mistake that often people do is single pipeline from the primary source. You need to have two pipelines going so that one acts as a backup for the other one. Cylinder manifold should not be placed at the same site next to the LMO or the oxygen concentrator. That is a wrong thing to do. If there is a disaster in one area, you are throwing everything in one basket. Reserve supply at a different location, even if both are manifold. Two separate manifolds is what is needed. Manifolds and concentrator can be at higher flows, at higher level to mitigate in case you have flood related issues in your area. You can put them at a higher level to mitigate other disasters and disaster preparedness. Primary supply should meet requirements for at least 4 days and reserves or backup for at least 3 days. So which means you have for 7 days supply. That is the level to which you need to plan. So B-type cylinders cannot be used as reserves. So this question often comes, what are the differences between this medical grade oxygen and industrial grade oxygen? Let me tell you, in production, there's no difference at all. It's all the same. But when it comes to handling them, this is a drug. Medical grade oxygen is a drug. So there is clear-cut certification. Anytime the LMO tanker leaves the facility, the manufacturing facility, it needs to have this kind of a quality check done for every supply that goes out. You need to have the QC, the certification, and that certificate has to be handed over to the hospital, which shows the stringent QC that goes in place with medical grade oxygen, which is not so with the industrial grade oxygen. Another thing with the manifold, with every filling of the cylinders, for a medical grade oxygen, there's purging, which means the inner surface of the cylinder is actually purged with oxygen before it is filled in, which doesn't happen for a industrial grade oxygen. Other than that, there aren't many differences. So obviously it is all to do with strict quality controls when it comes to medical grade oxygen. So thank you very much for the time given to me. I hope I finished in 9 minutes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Like a good school teacher and good trainer, I think you have put up everything on the board now. So from where we can take off. So I think now I'll come to my friend Dr. Sujit to take on, add on what Lallu has been able to cover, and specifically because you are known to have established PSA plant with all indigenous technology. We want to hear from you that and bit of economics of the subject. Dr. Sujit.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Joseph. You made my task much easier than I thought it would be. But the fact of the matter is that in any situation, or when you are doing construction or constructing a hospital, which is a very, very complex structure, one has to be certain about the oxygen. Now, as Dr. Joseph has said, the primary source of oxygen is always the LMO. But what you do is that for abundant precaution, you may have two sources of LMO, but you need micro cylinders. So therefore, when we had started with this, and we got a hint about, from the very first wave, we had got a hint about that, a high flow nasal oxygen and the ICUs were taking up enormous quantities of oxygen. So we put in micro cylinders. Now these micro cylinders have got a capacity of 200 meter cube. And this 200 meter cube takes you for about 5 to 6 hours, where you are completely dry out of your liquid medical oxygen. The one that we have, 2 cylinders, which are interconnected and with automatic switch over, is about 830 meter cube. So therefore, at any given point in time, the hospital as a single unit or supply of oxygen has got about a 36-hour continuous supply oxygen. Thereafter comes in the gas manifold. And we have a gas bank which has got cylinders with 7 meter cube. There are 32 cylinders on each side. So therefore, the utilization is much more than we actually require. And this has helped us immeasurably at this particular point in time. But essentially, coming down to the pressure swing absorption or the oxygenator. The oxygenator is something that we were looking at, and we were looking at it for quite some time, but we didn't really know. And let me assure you, sir, that the government of India, when we had a conversation with the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, they were not aware that we manufactured in India and we exported it to Europe. That was the first time that they heard of this oxygenator that we were looking for. And within a short point in time, we found that there were 20 vendors in India. And these 20 vendors were manufacturing and exporting. And I called one of these vendors from Chennai. He came all the way from Chennai to my hospital, and he said, I can set it up. Now, the entire unit weighs about, it's a spread load of about 4 to 4.5 tons. So therefore, you require good infrastructure. And the infrastructure has basically to be on steel, supported with concrete. You have good pillars. The entire unit is put on a checkered plate, a double-layered checkered plate, so that you can put absorption springs so that the noise dissemination is not beyond 45 decibels. So therefore, the generator itself is around 60 decibels. And we have residential areas which are very, very close to our hospital. So therefore, what we have done is also put sound barriers like you have on the highway or you have on flyovers, which are very close to housing societies. You have sound barriers. And those sound barriers we have put all around. One very important thing about the pressure swing absorption oxygenator is that there has to be adequate airflow, but it is not all weather. So therefore, you have to protect it from water, but at the same time, you have to have an area where there is adequate amount of oxygen air which is circulating. So that is very, very important. Now, from this point of view is that the air is absorbed, it is dried, there is a carbon filter, there is a zeolite filter, and there is a double zeolite filter. And then it goes into a tank which can supply, and the capacity that I have in the PSA which we have procured is 600 liters of oxygen per minute. So now this becomes the primary source. And as Dr. Joseph had pointed out, that the purity is between 93 and 95%. But the more you use the PSA, the greater is the purity of oxygen. Now, the zeolite will last you for 7 years. That is the guarantee that is given by the company, that the zeolite will last for 7 years. So therefore, you have, the more you run oxygen. Today, my oxygenator is giving 97% pure oxygen. And the oxygen we have validated by a third party as per what is mentioned in the Indian Pharmacopoeia. So therefore, the carbon monoxide, the carbon dioxide, water vapor, everything has to conform to the Indian Pharmacopoeia. And how is this done? This is done because there are sensors. At the exit valve, there are sensors, and the sensors are such that if it falls below the standard, which you have set, the oxygen is diverted out of the system and the LMO kicks in immediately. So therefore, what have we done? We have now managed the PSA at about 4.3 bar and the LMO at 4.1 bar. So therefore, there is oxygen continuously coming into the system from the LMO, but the primary supply is the PSA. Now, Dr. Lallu also said that with our temperatures, you can get a higher amount of oxygen. But let me tell you that The pressure also within the tank builds, though it is a vacuum sealed container. The pressure starts building, and in temperatures like Mumbai, there will be a certain waste of a gas. So therefore, we studied the liquid gas suppliers. Now there are so many, offshore liquid gas suppliers who get ships in and they pump in. I'm talking about commercial liquid gas, which is pumped in and routed for hundreds of kilometers. So we were wondering, how do they do this? So we got an engineer from ONGC. And he told us the technique on how you can actually have this LMO supplying continuously. And if the PSA's oxygen concentration falls below 93%, it will automatically kick in the LMO. And that is the equipment that we've set in. So now today, there is no worry as far as oxygen is concerned. Now let's go into the wards. What happens in medical equipment? In medical equipment, there are oxygen sensors. Now, these oxygen sensors, they are graded. They are graded between a certain level. So therefore, it is plus minus what you have set up. Now, for example, if you take a servo eye, the servo eye ventilator, which is manufactured by Mackay, which has been taken over by Jetting. Now, there, the oxygen sensors is balanced at 95% purity plus minus 3. So therefore, as soon as the ventilator gives an alarm, you can automatically kick in your LMO to improve the purity of oxygen, which so far, thankfully, we've not had to do. Now, when we come down to running the plant, we are going to run the plant throughout. And what we have done in our hospital is have 2 generators. I'm not talking about the purification plant and the oxygen chamber. No, we have 2 generators. The generator takes in air from the surrounding. So therefore, if one generator fails, then there is an automatic switch over to the next generator. So therefore, now what happens in running one single generator? If you run one single generator 24/7, 365, as per uniform tariff, that means there is no differentiation between the tariff of day or tariff of night, then in that case, the total expenditure for you per annum is going to be 17.5 lakhs. Now, if you have an LMO like we have with redundancy, and you are filling up that LMO with enhanced capacity, then in that case, the LMO's cost for running per year is 22.5 lakhs. 24/7, 365. It comes to 22.5 lakhs. So therefore, if the capital expenditure of the PSA oxygenator, you can recover in a period of 24 to 28 months because of the less amount of liquid medical oxygen that you're using. My oxygen bank, which I've got 32 cylinders left, right, is only for the doomsday emergency. So therefore, we are regularly checking the pressures, we are regularly filling it up, but this is what the medical economics works out to. So we've done this calculation, and especially where you have a day and night differential in tariff, then the cost will come down further because you can use your oxygenator at night and shut off your LMO completely. But the purity is something that you have to do. And this is what I found was, quite strange. I thought if you used the oxygenator less, then in that case you get more purity. But no, you have to use the oxygenator continuously to get enhanced purity. So now we are running at 97% purity. So no problems with the medical equipment, no problems with the anesthesia machines, the anesthesia stations. The anesthesia stations, like if you're using Zeus, if you're using Astiva, you use high-end anesthesia stations, you will have no problems, no alarms, nothing. So this is, I think, which is fairly important as far as I'm concerned. And we are following the Indian Pharmacopoeia Standards of 2018. Which is fairly recent. So therefore, this is what I thought I had to share as far as the oxygen part of it is concerned and the oxygenator. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Excellent inputs, very practical. And I think certain apprehension about PSA, which I had particularly from my friend, I think you have been able to explain very nicely. I think we'll keep few good questions for you at the end of it. So let me now invite Dr. Kishore Pichamuthu, who will be talking about conservation strategy. This conservation is very important because all these years, as Dr. Vijay also said in the beginning, we have been taking it granted that oxygen is available. We are not bothered about it, how it comes. So I think at this point of time, the conservation becomes very important. Let me invite Dr. Kishore Pichamuthu.
Thank you for having me on. So you just heard about the supply side, and so I'll now take over what we can do on the demand side. So I'm just going to look at how we can conserve energy, both in, oxygen, both in the wards and in the ICU. And we look at patient strategies, what we can do, in how we manage patients. We look at how we can have oxygen delivery strategy, including considerations about various devices, ventilators, BiPAPs, etc., and system level interventions which can reduce, consumption. So the first and foremost thing is, in patient strategy is to move the goalpost. When we had patients, earlier when we did not have a problem with oxygen, we would be happy with having patients with 100% saturation all the time. But now we've come to realize that, that was unnecessary. We have a lot of data to show that you do not have to have a high saturation. In fact, if you are aiming for very high saturation, that may be actually slightly harmful. And therefore, what we have come in, there's been always swings in the past of evidence between low and high, and what is now, most people have settled at an oxygen saturation target of 90 to 94% for most patients. Of course, for certain patients like COPD patients, you can go even lower down to 88%. And this is perfectly safe. And we've now been forced to do this, but I'm guessing now even after the oxygen shortage is gone, we can continue to use these conservative oxygen strategies. It's important to remember that this saturation is not the end thing that actually determines how the body is going to use this oxygen. It's the oxygen delivery to the tissues. So as long as cardiac output and hemoglobin are adequate, even with a lowish saturation, there is going to be enough oxygen delivery to the tissues, which means that the patient, that's why we see sometimes patients are in their 80s saturation, but they're still doing okay, and we're wondering how are they managing. And so that's because their cardiac output and hemoglobin are okay. But it's important whenever we are moving to a lower oxygenation target to keep a lookout for evidence of tissue oxygenation failure. That means any evidence that there's actually hypoxia at any of these tissue levels here should prompt us to use a higher target. Other things that will help us to reduce the amount of oxygen that a patient requires. One is to use appropriate sedation and paralysis. Patients who are on NIV, when they are agitated, they tend to breathe faster, they tend to use more minute ventilation, more oxygen. Keeping them calm, which actually reduces the oxygen requirement on that. Even patients who are on ventilation, when they are sedated and paralyzed, use actually less oxygen because their agitation, their high respiratory rate, everything you're able to control. And of course, this not only reduces oxygen demand, but it also reduces the lung injury to the patient. So that's a dual benefit. Prone positioning and semi-prone positioning now has become standard of care for most of our COVID ARDS patients. And this definitely also is one patient strategy that brings down the FiO2 requirements. We've seen patients who are needing 100% oxygen, and then we put them into prone position, and we're able to come down to 50%. So definitely, doing prones for at least, if it is as long as feasible, at least about 16 hours a day, improves outcomes in terms of the lung injury as well, and reduces oxygen requirement. Other small things, like whenever patients had, with COVID ARDS, we're seeing a lot of barotrauma, pneumomediastinum, pneumothorax. And often when these are small, our strategy is to use 100% oxygen in the hope that that will help this air get reabsorbed. And when there's a crunch of oxygen, we have learned to not use this strategy, to put in an ICD, intercostal chest drainage early, and not use 100% oxygen. The other area where we can actually save is when we realize that a patient is not going to make it, and we start talking to families about limiting therapy or withdrawing therapy. This is sometimes these patients are often on 100% oxygen. They're consuming a lot of oxygen, and we know that they're not going to make it. And this oxygen, of course, in a time of crunch could have been better utilized for certain other patients. So it is good to get into a conversation with the family early so that we do not continue inappropriate therapy for too long. And remember that the hospital also has non-COVID patients, and having these same strategies for the non-COVID patients as well, of course, will help bring down the oxygen requirement. When we look at the devices that we use to deliver oxygen, it's important to have certain things. We need to have a clear oxygen escalation plan. We need to consider positive pressure devices early. They save oxygen. We need to avoid certain oxygen guzzlers. We'll look at those. Try and innovate with some simple devices to try and reduce oxygen consumption. And we look at how the special considerations for non-invasive and invasive ventilation. So it's very important to have a clear escalation and a de-escalation strategy for oxygen. That means so that people are not randomly putting everybody on a Venturi device or a Hudson mask. So depending on the level of hypoxia, we need to start with nasal prongs, which use the lowest flow, and then work our way up to face mask and a non-rebreather reservoir bag, which gives a higher FiO2 and of course utilizes a little bit more oxygen as well. Now I've left out Venturis here because when we need to use Venturis, particularly in COVID ARDS who are needing more FiO2, remember the 40 and 60% Venturis use about 10 to 15 liters of oxygen. So that's quite a lot. And so instead of these Venturis, we can actually use a reservoir bag. And I'll come back to that in a while. Early use of positive pressure definitely reduces the requirement for oxygen because the FiO2, the fraction of inspired oxygen the patient requires, comes down when we give them positive pressure and start opening up parts of collapsed, the alveoli. So we can deliver this NIV using a CPAP device, a bilevel or a BPAP device or a BiPAP device, or use the NIV mode on a ventilator. So the earlier we put them on this, it's good for the patient, reduces their work of breathing and leads to improved outcomes. At the same time, reduces the oxygen utilization as well. Oxygen guzzlers. Now, like I mentioned, 40 and 60% Venturi devices use a lot of oxygen, and we found that using a non-breather reservoir mask at just 6 to 8 liters gives equal to or actually higher FiO2 than this while consuming less oxygen. Less wastage of oxygen. In a Venturi, the oxygen that is continuing to flow in even when the patient is expiring. In the reservoir bag system, during expiration, the oxygen actually goes in to fill the reservoir bag and is not wasted. High flow nasal cannula, like it was mentioned earlier, is one of those devices that really guzzles a lot of oxygen. Patients, the usual flows that we use are 30 to 50 liters per minute. That's really high. And so during this wave in our hospital, we've just stopped using these devices completely. And that was the policy in many hospitals in countries like the UK as well, where even though they did not reach the kind of crisis situations like we did, they took these steps because they realized that this was very inappropriate use of oxygen. Other small things like using a mask over the nasal cannula actually will help us to use lower flows and avoid wastage. Nebulization, sometimes nebulizations routinely are connected using an oxygen flow meter. We are so much in the habit of doing that, and we could actually switch to a compressed air for that and save up on oxygen as well. Sometimes these nebulizations, even after they get over, nobody really cares to switch them off, so that's a continuous leak of oxygen. So this is something that we should keep in mind as well. We have over this second wave, we've heard, over many webinars, people in different parts of the country making different innovations to reduce oxygen use, and these are some of these. This is a simple Bain circuit which provides positive pressure, and in doing so, actually we can actually reduce the oxygen requirement of patients who are sometimes on 100% oxygen. We've made certain innovations in our hospital using ventilator tubings and reservoir bags that have helped us give positive pressure at very low flows. Like this example here with a small PEEP valve that's just connected to a mask, and that helps us to use it's a low flow mask, and yet it gives us positive pressure and reduces the patient's work of breathing as well and reduces oxygen consumption. So it's important to keep looking out for what you can innovate with the equipment you have. Patients on NIV, it's important to make sure there's no leak. Leaks are a wastage of oxygen. Like I mentioned earlier, it is important to sedate them so that they're not very agitated and breathing very hard. And we use the bare minimum pressure support. COVID ARDS patients really do not need much pressure support. They need PEEP. And using high pressure supports is harmful for the patient and also uses more oxygen. Patients on a ventilator, actually ventilators do not really consume that much oxygen when we compare them with some of the other devices. And the oxygen consumption in a ventilator is really, most of it, you can see right on the screen when you're standing in front of the ventilator, it's the minute ventilation. And the minute ventilation times the FiO2 will give you the total oxygen outflow. And so therefore, if you're able to minimize this minute ventilation and minimize FiO2, you're going to reduce the oxygen consumption. And it's very interestingly, patients who are ventilated with ARDS, we all follow what is called a lung protective ventilation strategy. It's a strategy to prevent injury by the ventilator, ventilator-induced lung injury. And all these components of the ventilator-induced lung injury prevention actually also save oxygen. We try and minimize tidal volume and driving pressure to as low as possible. And doing this, of course, reduces minute ventilation, which also reduces oxygen consumption. We try and use the least rate possible because a high rate also injures the lung. And we try and use an optimal PEEP so that as you increase the PEEP and open up the lung, you're able to actually come down on the FiO2. So actually using standard lung protective ventilation when the patient is invasively ventilated actually just also gives us the double benefit of reducing oxygen consumption as well. Some other tips with invasive ventilation is to use the lowest base flow setting. This is a setting that we normally don't pay much attention to. It is an oxygen that keeps flowing through the system all the time in the background, and you can just move it to the lowest setting possible. Tubing leaks, cuff leaks, all these things are all contribute to leaks and oxygen wastage. Some mention was made about ventilators alarming when you connect it to when the oxygen concentrator is supplying is connected to the central oxygen supply, and that is a possibility when the purity of oxygen falls. So that's something to keep in mind. So in one of our hospitals where we are using a large oxygen concentrator plant to supply oxygen, we've routed the oxygen concentrator oxygen to the wards, while the LMO is routed to the ICU. That way we are not really facing any problems with alarms, low FiO2 alarms. The other question that is sometimes asked is, can we connect these small standalone oxygen concentrators to a ventilator? In most cases, no. There are very few models available with what is called a low flow inlet option. And Hamilton C1, for example, is one such ventilator. So I know some small hospitals, rural hospitals, which are actually using an oxygen concentrator and supplying the oxygen into the low flow inlet of the C1 ventilators, and they're managing. So that is something to consider when you're for your next ventilator purchase as well. System level interventions inside the ICU to reduce oxygen consumption, to make sure that all our ports and other things actually don't have any leaks. We realized only when we did this that a lot of our flow meters were actually leaking. We're actually supplying much more than what was indicated by the flow. So, preventive maintenance, it's necessary at all times, but in times like this, definitely. And I'm sure audits and and oxygen rounds will be covered, but it's important to set up a system inside the ICU so that someone is going around every few hours to see if any patient is on inappropriately high FiO2, or somebody has done suction and left the FiO2 at 100% and not brought it down. Simple things that we can adjust. And then when we set a conservative, saturation targets, it may not be implemented at the ground level, and sometimes it helps to change the SpO2 alarms to set a high SpO2 alarm such that it alarms when the SpO2 goes too high, and that makes everybody aware and bring down the FiO2 as well. Other things, of course, is the ICUs are like was mentioned, very large consumers of oxygen. So make sure that the ICU loads are not on one system. Preferably, split the supply to ICUs so that all the ICUs are not on one system, overloading that oxygen supply system. And very important to have a disaster plan. We were all, I'm sure, living on a prayer. Every day we were just praying that the oxygen truck comes in. So it's very important to make sure that we have an alternate source that we can switch to, and also have an evacuation plan for patients. That means have an understanding as to which hospital can I move my patients, at least ICU patients, and have a way planned out beforehand how you would do it. So all these are lessons learned during this COVID time. Like you mentioned, like it was mentioned earlier, these are things that we never thought of earlier, but are very valuable lessons that will continue to help us post-COVID as well. And I'm sure this will drive a lot of research on how we can actually reduce consumption of oxygen while we manage patients optimally in the future. Thank you.
Oh, excellent inputs again, Doctor. Wonderful presentation, really. Dr. Bhagat, you have a very quick point on the conservation?
Dr. Kishore has said a number of things and from his practical usage in the ICU. And I would like to add 2-3 more points by which you can conserve oxygen. One, must understand the flow meters which are generally available in the market. They're not calibrated accurately, but they deliver almost 15 to 25% more than what they are showing. So if you keep that in mind and go by the observations of the patient saturation, that will be better rather than looking at the flow meter, what the doctor has said. Okay. Number 2, the use of nasal prong and using of the mask. So he's using the principle of extending the dead space of the airway. In olden times, if we remember, we were using nasal catheters, which we are putting in the nasopharynx and thereby using the dead space. So in many cases, 2 days when we were really struggling with the oxygen, each and every liter of oxygen, we started using those nasal catheters, and on top of that, we put the mask. Instead of nasal prongs, I started putting those catheters, and that helped me in raising the oxygen saturation of many patients. Number 3, Bain circuit he mentioned, and that's a very useful circuit. Only thing is some patients' tolerance is very poor on that count, but some patients they tolerated, and we could raise the saturation from 60 to 90% within a couple of minutes. That is something which clinicians should learn about it, because that is a very useful thing. People who are working in ICU, they know about it.
Okay.
And then what we did was, for those 2 days, we know that the cylinders which were used in the manifold, they generally stop working. The alarm is raised around 7.5 bar or 10 bars, it was raised. So when these cylinders were removed from the manifold, they were still containing significant amount of oxygen in them. So when we were struggling for every liter of oxygen, we shifted these cylinders, connected them to the flow meters and put them on bedside, and they delivered oxygen for 3 to 4 hours on low flows, not very high flow. So we were able to use that oxygen, something like extracting every pound of flesh from the system, what was there. So this way we were able to carry on with these things. Then another device, what we can do is, when we are having oxygen concentrators and the crisis is there, we can shift all the patients who are requiring just oxygen without any other ventilator or say high flow or any other BiPAP device. We can put all these patients on these oxygen concentrators because they don't give much pressure. Oxygen concentrator, as he rightly mentioned, does not support the ventilator. Ventilators generally they require a good pressure support, and most of these. Now, slightly disagreeing with Dr. Chatterjee on PSA. PSA by design, they are supposed to deliver 93 plus minus 3%. When you talk to the manufacturing, my first PSA plant was established in 2016.
Now that discussion, Dr. Bhagat, we'll have in the end.
We can have later on also, but this was about the oxygen conservation, small things, but we were able to manage and we never felt short of oxygen in that.
Thank you. Good inputs, wonderful inputs. Now, I think the related topic is how do we audit? How do the oxygen stewardship? So may I invite Dr. Jothi?
Thank you, sir. May I express my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Vijay Agarwal, Dr. Girdhar, Gyani, and Dr. Lallu for inviting me to be part of this webinar. And I'm very happy to be amidst the esteemed presenters to introduce the oxygen stewardship. The clippings of this slide are very familiar to all of us, which helped us walk the path healthcare industry have never walked in the past. The healthcare system was compelled to handle the dilemma of an alarming oxygen shortage because of the surge of the critical cases that we have seen. The government has taken measures to appoint state oxygen nodal officer, district zonal oxygen cell, 24 hours by 7 helpline, reducing taxes on oxygen, and mandated that every hospital which is 100 bed plus with ICU facilities to have oxygen generation plant. And at this point of time, it is imperative that the hospital strengthens its governance on oxygen management. Stewardship is an ethic that embodies the responsible planning, management, resources, and oxygen is considered to be one of the resources which is largely used in the healthcare setting, categorized under management of medication as per NABH standard. A written guidelines on rational use and prevention of waste shall guide healthcare professionals on efficiency in oxygen management. Now, oxygen stewardship aims to conserve oxygen and protect waste, scaffolding 4 major objectives that is the focus of the audit. 1, the most efficient and least wasteful use of oxygen. When necessary, use the least amount of oxygen. Selection and use of effective methodologies like mask and the devices for the oxygen therapy, and periodic surveillance and auditing of the selected indicators in the clinical and non-clinical categories to ensure efficient oxygen resource management. An oxygen stewardship team should be a subcommittee within the pharmacy and therapeutic committee who meets periodically to analyze continuously in improving oxygen management through periodic surveillances and audit. The multidisciplinary team consisting of medical, nursing, biomedical, manifold, purchase, IT, and facility team is vital. Designing and delivering mandatory training on each of their roles and responsibilities towards building oxygen stewardship program becomes integral part of induction and ongoing training at the hospital as a new norm. The effectiveness of the program of implementation is assessed through well-designed oxygen surveillance and audit tools. Now I'm going to present to you 2 important tools, which is divided into clinical and non-clinical. Now, most of the presenters, like the 3-4 presenters who have done so far, have very carefully put out the points. And all those points are there in it, and few I would mention now. Oxygen stewardship program shall have a running dashboard of oxygen requirement for each patient in the hospital on daily basis. A thorough oxygen audit should be done twice a day to ensure no leak by staff nurses and the other members, those who are involved, and early escalation if observed. Introduction of Bain circuit to improve efficiency in delivery, which is already mentioned there, and the oxygen by almost 20% it is reducing. That's what the study says. And precautions to prevent build up the carbon dioxide should be taken, and ABG is checked frequently, and this can be also as a quality indicator involved into the clinical dashboard. Doctors, nurses, and staff and patients are educated on oxygen rationing and consumption. Example, zero down of oxygen flow while patient is off mask and nasal prongs during mealtime and bio breaks. Admission bundle should involve certain areas like oxygen is a medicine and only doctors can prescribe, nurses can only administer while in hospital, and it is based on the patient's physiological response and the lab parameters. Caution boards near the bedside and in the visibility of the patient. Do not handle oxygen flow meters, knobs, or adjust flows. Should be displayed as part of patient responsibility. All the flow meters should be working well, and patient should be placed in proning, COVID, awake repositioning. Proning protocol is very important, and every 2 hours this has to be monitored. And oxygen is conserved by lowering the saturation threshold deemed adequate for patient. For example, it is already mentioned 94% when high flow or O2 support as far as possible to avoid HFNOs. Escalation and de-escalation, zoning of the bed for better monitoring, and large oxygen cylinder should be fitted in manifold to supply multiple patients and to have a close monitoring. Oxygen stewardship program will aid in database for each hospital and help them to be prepared to be part of the state oxygen control centers formed by the state government and seek support to overcome bottlenecks with supply and logistics. The entire healthcare system and the organization and every healthcare workers involved in patient care should be held accountable for the rational use of oxygen as a therapy. By doing this, oxygen-related issues could be sorted out and proactively it will help, and the critical patient could get the need care without any hitches. So I would conclude saying that COVID-19 brought to realization the value of oxygen to human mankind. Let us conserve oxygen with caution and care, and audit is the way forward. Thank you very much.
Like a good quality auditor, I think you have pinpointed the specific point in very quick time. Thank you so much, Dr. Jothi. So now thank you. I bring my last speaker, panelist, Dr. Narin. Dr. Narin, you have to tell us now, all of them have spoken. You have to tell us what is the specific, which is actually has not been covered for the smaller hospitals, and how do they manage the economics?
Very right, sir. First of all, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be on this platform. See, oxygen has become a very, very hot topic. Oxygen is something which was always taken for granted, and I don't think we ever had any issue in last 30 years. But pandemic 2021 saw an increased demand leading to short supply and unprecedented situation. Boards like this, where they have announced that they are stopping admissions, unfortunately came up. Surprisingly, India produces 7,500 metric tons of oxygen per day, and pre-COVID only 700 metric tons was required per day. In first wave, it rose to 2,800, and in second, it rose to 5,000 metric tons, which is also available, but probably the distribution and the arrangement and management was not good enough. Hence the issue, a hot topic, managing oxygen everywhere, including small hospitals. For small hospitals, there are certain peculiarities. First of all, small hospital I'd like to define as a hospital which is less than 100 beds, rather up to 100 beds. They have specific constraints like space, finances, and resources. Most of the small hospitals, if you'll go into their history, like I can share my own, we started as a very small 5-bed hospital 30 years back, and over a period of time, we have been expanding to come to this level. And during this time, when you start with a smaller size, neither you have any expert help, nor you have the vision that you will reach to such a state. So you start with only smaller measures. And that is what is the state of most of the small hospitals nowadays. Very small ones, they manage only with D-type oxygen cylinders, which are supplied on each bed directly to the patient. And the ones which grow a little bit, say 15, 20 beds, 30 beds, they start putting manifolds, initially manual ones with 2 to 4 D-type cylinders, and then going upwards to twin row or automatic, which they do as time goes by. And in the present circumstances, with the better awareness and the improvement of the standards in status and quality because of bringing in of registration of nursing homes and NABH, now we find a lot of hospitals which are between 50 and 100 beds also have LMOs with them, either installed as tanks or as micro cylinders, as Dr. Sujit told us. These micro cylinders are transportable and they can be delivered and put in your hospitals. Few of them have installed PSA also, and some of them are now planning after the High Court advisory. There is another learning for us, which we have already done, that extra backup for ICU is required. These things are usually present in big hospitals, but for smaller hospitals, I think it is a necessity. We need similar facilities, and we have to do it in our own way, at our own level. So finally, in short, if we talk of the recommendations for small hospitals, we must have oxygen outlet on each bed, which is missing from smaller hospitals. We must have a manifold with D-type cylinders and try to have a backup with automatic switch over. I think it is a must. We must aim for this. It's a small cost which comes initially, but it saves you a lot of trouble. If you are more than 50 beds, I think LMO is strongly recommended, because typically a 50-bed hospital would be using 15 to 20 cylinders per day in the normal circumstances, and one LMO of a micro cylinder of 200 liters is equivalent to about 22 cylinders. So that takes you through 1.5 days of supply. And if you have 2 cylinders, then it's good enough for about 3 days, which keeps you secure and tension free. PSA is an additional backup, which the advantages and disadvantages have already been discussed. But I think with the advisory, more and more people are putting, and there is no denying that it is an additional backup. It can never be as a standalone primary source, but as an additional backup. Now, another thing which comes up is, which I think Dr. Lallu also basically defined in the beginning, was how to calculate the requirement. It's the same parameters what she advised, that whatever normally you are using in normal circumstances, or if you are planning a new one, then 0.75 liters per minute per bed, or 10 liters per minute per ICU bed or critical areas, or 5 liters per minute for NICU bed. If you calculate your daily requirement, my recommendation is that right in the beginning, you should plan and have a supply of approximately 4 days, 3 to 4 days. So 3 times is what I recommend for my colleagues with smaller hospitals. They must plan to basically remain safe from the eventuality which we faced this time. Automate as much as possible. Alarms should be in place, because frequently, at least if you have an ICU, you'll find that the pressures go down, creating a lot of problem and ill health for our patients, and alarms should be able to warn you. For LMOs, pressure becomes an issue when requirement increases. So you have to install some pressure regulators also. We had this problem this time, and we just didn't know what to do, because the pressure would just not come up. And when we connected our D-type cylinders, they would finish very, very fast. And again, the pressure would drop. Have some spare oxygen concentrators, as Dr. Bhagat has suggested, to use them in the wards. And for critical areas, I think it is very essential that we should have a separate backup, because those are the areas which need full pressure, full supply. Rest of the areas can be managed by your regular supply and by oxygen concentrators and small cylinders. Audits we have already talked about. Another thing what I would suggest for smaller setups is that they should pool their facilities. They should make a group of 10 to 15 nursing homes in the surrounding area and be in touch with each other, maybe form a small WhatsApp group where if anybody gets into trouble, should be able to seek help, and we should be able to manage this. Another small thing, I think a state responsibility cannot be denied. They have to supply adequate oxygen on site for us. Compliances should be simplified, subsidies if you want to cap charges, and costing should be done. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think I can't really visualize the kind of inputs which have come in this short period of 1 hour and 15 minutes, that level. I don't think they have left anything uncovered. Now, with such excellent inputs coming, I will leave the difficult part of summarizing and question answer to my colleague, Dr. Vijay Agarwal.
I think, as you said, sir, that it has been a fantastic overall coverage of this entire gamut of the oxygen thing that we all wanted to know. So I have, I think, I can see a lot of very senior people present over here, and I would like, in fact, idea is that, are we still missing out something? So let me first invite Air Marshal Dr. Pawan Kapoor, one of our patrons. I can see his window, sir. So, sir, if you can unmute and give your input, sir.
Good evening, sir, and good evening, all of you. Firstly, I must like to thank you all for a wonderful session that we have had. Excellent session. I was glued to the screen like nobody else, like a student learning from scratch how to think about oxygen, how to plan for it, how to deliver it, and how to audit for it. So I think, in my opinion, nothing has been left uncovered. Maybe some legal aspects that we can leave for some other time when we have some legal issues, that they are all covered by the Gas and Explosives Act in India, and they are supposed to be followed. So most of the questions that are there in the chat box can be answered by just going through the Gas and Explosives Act, which can tell this. Otherwise, I think to the wonderfully organized this thing, what we say, symposium, or you call it a webinar, whatever you might like to call it, but the wonderful. And what I would like to say was that, I loved the term Oxygen Stewardship Program. It reminded me, that you have chosen from the Antibiotic Stewardship Program and brought it to Oxygen Stewardship Program. And the rationale is the same. Rational use of antibiotics, rational use of oxygen. I love that thing. So thank you very much, CAHO, and thank you, Dr. Vijay and all of you and all the presenters. You did an excellent job. I don't think I need to put anything into it, except that legal aspect, which can all go back and read. The explosive rules were separate about oxygen handling and storage of cylinders. Space required about everything about liquid oxygen is given. That's all from my side. Thank you very much, sir.
But coming from Air Marshal Pawan Kapoor, it's a huge compliment, as well as because he's known for his forthright talk, as well as he has got such immense experience of being almost, of course, he was the first assessor when I was in Maxer. So we were amongst the first 5 hospitals, and you were the principal assessor. So right from that time, and now when you are a chair of the accreditation committee and whatnot. So I think your inputs to say that this has been very useful is very heartening to us. And like what you said, I think as regarding the legal issues, if there are any specific thing, we'll of course take it up, and we'll also try to bring it up. But I would like to definitely emphasize what Dr. Narin Sehgal said. And that is, I think, huge number of hospitals, and those huge number of hospitals are not in hundreds, maybe in thousands, who are still working with the kind of a cylinder going on to the bedside. I think the need for starting at least a manifold and a piped thing coming to every bed is extremely important. And I think we should take it up as as I would say, one of the things that both AHPI and CAHO may have to take to educate. And I don't think it's a hugely expensive thing for the hospitals to do that, but that's very important. Anybody else, you can also raise your hands to ask a question, but I can see Gracie Mathai, who is a very senior assessor, member of the accreditation committee, and as well as a very senior nursing person. So madam, anything that you would like to add or say from the point of view of your baby memorial?
Good evening, all of you. And really, as I just support Pawan sir, that such an excellent, we call it as workshop, or we call it a seminar, or whatever is there. It was very excellent and very educative. And even I have learned many things, sir. To my hospital, what Dr. Lallu has very clearly said, we have 2 types of backup. So hence, in this pandemic also, we did not face any problem. Only the requirement of oxygen has gone into 5-fold than the earlier one what was there. But sir, I have just one doubt regarding the PSI, what Dr. Chatterjee has said. This PSI as well as LMA. So like, I don't know, it's maybe my doubt, like how can we use PSI and LMA together don't you think that we require two set of lines, like one may be going to the ward and other may be going to the ICU, like LM may go to the ICU and other may go to the ward? How can you combine and then use? That's my doubt.
Ms. Gracie Mathai, what it is that this is quite a simple technology. You can keep the pressure of your liquid medical oxygen a little lower than your PSA. So as I had mentioned, the PSA, which goes directly into the hospital line, comes in at 4.2 bar. And you can keep your LMO at about 3.7 or 3.8 bar. So it continuously keeps supplying. PSAs by design are meant to give you 93 plus minus 3. But we have achieved about 97% purity of oxygen. And that is because with the low flow of the LMO. Now, this technology is very well established in liquid gas supplies. You know, they, from in areas in Maharashtra, they are actually transporting gas, liquid gas, hundreds of kilometers, where the pressure is 120 bars. So therefore, if there is any engineer, and we got one from ONGC, who told us the simple thing that you just adjust your pressures, and there are pressure regulatory valves. And these pressure regulatory valves make your job very, very easy. So therefore, you need an expert, he needs to guide you, and it's a very simple thing. So it is going to be a very simple, exercise. If you really want to set it up, get an engineer and we'll help you, or please ask us, we'll help you.
So this is definitely, again, the personal experience of Dr. Sujit Chatterjee of having used it and making it functional is extremely useful. So now it's only an issue for somebody. We can go and watch, somebody can go there, see, and he can always introduce you to the vendor. Is there any kind of, you want to give any input regarding the installation cost, sir?
So the machine, the set, is a negotiated price, but the quoted price will be around about 67 to 70 lakhs. Your infrastructure, it depends upon your infrastructure. I have created a very good infrastructure. So that costs me around about 30 lakhs. So, a round figure is what you're looking at is about 1 crore rupees. But you can put that in value of life, sir. 1 crore rupees doesn't really matter.
Anyway, I think, and the people must understand the difference between these home concentrators and this big oxygen concentrators, which we are talking about in the hospitals. There are two different animals. So that's something we must kind of understand. And while we are at this, sir, that at the moment, I think the amount of oxygen that has been used at home care has been huge. And one of the problems which came up was that the cylinders were also squeezed into the home care space or by the RWAs and many, many things. So I don't know what will be your view on it. My feeling is that at least D-type cylinders should be reserved only for hospital use. It's only the B-type or A-type cylinders which should be given for the residential use. Now, if that can this be our recommendation to the government? And that was still one area where we'll want Dr. Bhabatosh and this Supreme Court appointed committee, because if the D-type cylinders are definitely a huge requirement for the hospital sector, I think, of all grades and shades. So, Lallu, you will have any view on this?
Yeah, certainly D-type cylinders are not safe to be used at home also. They are very heavy, more than 100 kgs to be moved. And particularly in a situation like this, when there's a disaster, I think the focus should be more on the hospitals to be using the D-type cylinders. Certainly you have the B-type cylinders and smaller ones available. But having said that, The safety aspect, somebody had also asked a question, can I use my D-type cylinder in the ward directly connecting it to the patient? Again, the aspect is you can use them. Nobody is going to stop. You can chain them. That's how we were using in earlier days, where, you know, every 2 or 3 bedside, you'll have one D-type cylinder, which is chained and connected to, before we had our pipelines. It is doable, but safety aspects are extremely, you're going to compromise on safety if you're going to be wheeling these 100 kg cylinders, high pressure cylinders, and within the facility, if there is a small leak or a blast, it is like going to become like a missile. So it is always better to keep them out of the hospital as bulk cylinders, as manifold. So handling these cylinders are also very, very important. And when a layperson is going to handle this at home, it's even more dangerous. So I think it's good that if we can restrict that, certainly.
Yeah. I can see Dr. Renu Devprasad. Would you like to have any comments or any question from your experience?
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for that very wonderful presentation. The webinar was extremely good because it was an integrated approach to this very difficult topic during this challenging time. So just a few little things I feel I want to voice. One is that in smaller hospitals, during this pandemic time, the problem has been supply of oxygen. That is to say, certain institutions have been provided oxygen. Certain institutions have not been provided oxygen. So if we say that bedside outlet is advised to every small hospital, if they don't get the cylinders, they can't give the oxygen to the patients. So I think it would be better that all small hospitals do have a few 10-liter concentrators so that they could keep them in the rooms, so that irrespective of a cylinder supply, they could have oxygen to give to patients. That is one suggestion. Second is that yes, B-type cylinders only should be allowed for home therapy, because D-type cylinders actually, like Lallu said, are extremely dangerous. And ideally, they are meant to have a dual regulator to down-regulate the pressure before it is used. And recently, there was a cylinder valve disconnected. It was like a missile, So it can be extremely dangerous. So only B-type cylinders should be used at home. A-types have a certain compatibility to anesthesia machines. So normally A-types cannot be used in homes because they have a pin index and all kinds of things on them. So this is the second thing. The third is whether we should have code black, because there was a day when I was down to the last 30 minutes of supply. So I had to send messages to all the doctors saying, see, oxygen may run out any minute. Please, please do whatever you have to do. So this is just food for thought. But anyway, I have implemented the code black for my hospital, thinking if I'm down to 1 hour of supply at any time, we will activate saying hospital code black, so that all the clinicians and the nurses and all know that something may be happening in the next hour.
Thank you, Dr. Devprasad. Very useful inputs. Use of course, oxygen concentrators has already been talked about by Narin and Dr. C.M. Bhagat also, that you should have some of them for a emergency. Now, question for Dr. Sujit Chatterjee. Would you like to elaborate a little, what is the difference between this PSA and the VSA technology, and which one is better for the hospitals taking, he says, 500 liters per minute, kind of it?
The VSA as an advancement over the PSA is definitely, it is the vacuum swing adsorption technology. The equipment is much smaller, it is more expensive, its throughput is much more, its oxygen concentration would be better. But if you already have an oxygenator, then PSA oxygenator, then you can use an oxygen concentrator. So rather than getting for more expensive equipment like a VSA, which is of course very compact, it is very good. Its energy levels are also the electricity that it uses is less, and at the same time the generator makes very little noise. Within 45 decibels you're through, but it's going to cost you more, definitely. So rather than that, I would use this. But technology wise, I think the only thing about vacuum swing absorption is that it produces a better concentration of oxygen, less space, much more sort of efficiency as far as oxygen production is concerned.
So another question is, will there be a pressure drop in oxygen if the length of the pipeline is 500 meters from LMO to the manifold using a 42 millimeter diameter pipeline?
Of course, there is going to be. You'll have to calculate these things. I mean, there's no question of saying that 4.2 or 3.87 bar is going to help you. So the pressure might have to be increased a little bit more if you're having a very high diameter, thick bore pipe. So therefore, these sort of things have to be worked out when you're installing your equipment. Not at the time once you've installed it. Now you say, now I've got 500 meters. Now how will it go there? That's not the way to work it out. You have to work it out exactly as to when it hits your hospital pipeline inlet. That is what is more important. Yeah. So therefore, all these pressure mechanisms have to be worked out beforehand.
Absolutely. Can I add on to that, sir?
Yeah.
I think the farther you go, the pressure drop is going to be more. So you certainly will have to keep it closer to your hospital, your building. And the higher floors, there will be pressure drops. So you really, as Dr. Sujit said, you have to factor in all this while you're designing the system. And, you know, from the LMO, it's actually 8 bar that comes in. And then it becomes 4.2 bar at your manifold end. So the pressure reducing, it reduces and then it comes into the system. So all these pressure calculations are extremely important while you're designing the system. So I think you really have to get a good consultant, good engineer to design properly with the right, pipelines also to be used. Very, very important.
So pressure reducing valves are very important, sir. Pressure reducing valves you need to have. Otherwise, these systems don't work. I mean, it sounds very easy that we finish it off and all that, but it is a little technical.
So the other question is that in non-COVID times, will the running cost of this PSA or VSA plant be justified? Would you recommend using this source as the primary source in such times?
So we are all learning at this particular point in time. Even I'm learning. I'm not sure of what is going to happen. Dr. Bhagat must be having much more experience on this matter. I have just installed my equipment. But the point of what I'm trying to say is that I'm not going to come to a situation where I'm not going to be using the oxygenator. I am never going to come to that position because I'm going to use the oxygenator continuously with this input from the liquid medical oxygen. So therefore, in medical economic terms, for the next 26 months, this is going to fire every day till I recover my money.
So I think, sir, thank you so much. So thank you very much, friends. And I must compliment all the speakers, one and all, for their excellent presentation. And I think it has resulted into a kind of a webinar, which I'm sure that you can tell your colleagues to please go and listen to it again. We are sure that this will definitely enhance our understanding of this complex thing. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.